Russian researcher Ivan Pavlov was famous, of course, for his soft, silky hair, and that's because he conditioned it. Okay, so if you don't know who Pavlov is, you won't get that joke, and if you do know who Pavlov is, you probably didn't want that joke. But I can assure you this video can only get better from here, because what I'd like to talk about is how Pavlov's research into classical conditioning has been a huge key for me in improving my mental health and my personal effectiveness in life and in work. What Pavlov discovered is that the dogs he was doing research on would salivate not only when they were given food, but at the very sight of their feeders. Later, he went on to blow a whistle or ring a bell while feeding the dogs, and soon he found that you could simply ring a bell and the dog would start salivating even if no food was present. Much like, say, notifications on our phone go off, and whether or not it's an important message, boom, we're there opening it up. So I have personal experience of this because I have a dog, and one thing she knows is that the word walk is paired with her favorite activity in the entire world. So my wife and I might be talking, and I might say something like, oh yeah, I walked to the shops the other day, and suddenly her ears go up and it's like Christmas Day. I don't know what it is about dogs and walks, but every single time she looks at me like she's just won the lottery. And unfortunately, I was just using it passively in a sentence. But what this makes me realize is dogs are kind of like furry Alexas or Siris, right? They're listening all the time, just waiting for that magic moment when that magical word comes up. So it got me thinking, what if we listen to ourselves the way dogs listen? One of the keys I found for me in just becoming a happier person is managing my commitments more effectively. And of course, you can't manage what you're not aware of. So one of the other questions I started asking myself is, what if I really got serious about my commitments and understanding when I was making a commitment the way a dog gets serious about food or walkies? What I found is that you can use this thing called conditioned responses to your advantage and install what I've come to just deem a commitment detector. The reason why this is, the reason why commitments matters and managing them matters so much is something I want to talk about in this video. But I also really want to talk about 4 different strategies for managing commitments when you make them that relate to what I found to be 4 different types, basically, of commitments that can be made in the world. This goes a really long way toward improving well-being, happiness, trust within teams, trust of yourself, your sense of self-esteem and self-worth. And frankly, it's really easy once you get the hang of it. So I know you're salivating to learn more. Let's get started. So why should you care so much about commitments? I did another video on this where I go into a lot more detail, and so there should be a link somewhere up there to that. Basically, the video goes into a lot more explanation about why it feels so therapeutic to see yourself keeping your commitments and honoring your agreements. On the flip side, we can also talk about how not keeping your agreements basically erodes your self-esteem and trust with those around you. And we know this intuitively, everything from, yeah, honey, I'll fix that later, when you have no intention of doing so, just to get them off your back feels pretty crummy, to those moments of shock where, the boss thought that you said you'd handle a particular thing and you thought you were just part of the team and someone else was on point to get it done. Those are not pleasant moments, and they don't sit right, and they accumulate over time more than anything. So the best thing you can do is catch yourself before you make commitments that you aren't going to follow through on. Stop being the yes person to so many things coming your way, and really acknowledge that, overwhelm leads to burnout. It does. And if you accept the idea that just you have a lot of choices in life, and nearly everything that you're experiencing is something you've either sort of actively created, or at least promoted in some way, or at worst case, allowed to happen. If you really believe that you are in some sense in charge of your life and of your destiny, then commitments are the way that you take charge of that. And being really careful about what commitments you make so that you can follow through on them is a really necessary precursor to being in the driver's seat of your life. Input channels in our world have just totally exploded. And so it can be an incredible task in itself just to figure out what is information coming at you and what is something that needs to have something done about it, what we call something that's actionable. Of the stuff that does come in, there's broadly two types, right? There's stuff that I need to do, and there's stuff that somebody else needs to do. And that's pretty much it. So let's talk about the stuff that you need to do in the times when you make a commitment. How do you detect that, right? How do you know, much like the dog, that this is a magic key word? Well, they're called modal verbs, and all they are is constructions like I will, I shall, I'm gonna, right? So when you hear that come out of your mouth or on a text or in some way transmitted to another human being, you might be making a commitment. In fact, you probably almost always are making a commitment when you're using one of those kinds of verbs. The best thing you can do in that moment is get it written down. It's impressive when waiters, waitresses can remember 6 or 7 different tables' orders, right? It's a kind of a cute trick to get tips. For everybody else and every other job in the world, it's just really not okay anymore to pretend that you're going to keep all this stuff in your head and still be happy and sane and definitely remember it. I get nervous in meetings when someone says they'll do something for me and they don't write it down, because 9 times out of 10, my experience is that they're going to let it slip in some way. So you can be kind to yourself, you can respect yourself, and you can respect the other person by writing it down whenever you hear one of those magic words come out of your mouth, like, I will. There's another type of commitment that is a bit more subtle, but in some ways a lot more powerful in terms of how it can impact your own sense of self-worth and well-being. And that's commitments to yourself. Sometimes when I'm a bit overwhelmed, I've got a lot going on, weirdly enough, the thoughts I have in the shower are interesting, good ideas, but I don't really want to commit to them right there and then. Other times, there are things that really need to be done, things that I've said I'd do for myself. No one else is really necessarily going to hold me to account on it, but it's important and it matters. And so distinguishing in this way between good ideas, random thoughts, and stuff that actually really needs to get done, that really matters to me, stuff I said I'd do for me or for someone else, that really the commitment is just to me to make sure that gets done, is the first step in being able to manage all of these thoughts that flood our way many, many times, sometimes per second. And very often, the very next step is something really straightforward and simple with these commitments to self. Very often, it's a bit of research. Look into this, check that out, take a single next step in the direction of fulfilling a commitment to yourself. And just doing that can be incredibly powerful. So I teach a methodology that's comprehensive called Getting Things Done. It's comprehensive in the way that it helps you manage all of your commitments and free up your mind for better things. In this methodology, we distinguish between those things that are good ideas that you just might kind of want to review later, but aren't active commitments to yourself. We put that on something we call a someday maybe list. And for those things that are active commitments, we encourage you to identify a single doable very next action or next step to start to get into motion with these things. You don't have to be a black belt getting things done practitioner, however, to recognize when you've made a commitment to yourself of any kind, to write that down, and to simply identify a simple, doable step that's going to help you feel better about taking care of you. So then there's all the stuff that other people say they're going to do for you. And let's face it, people say all kinds of things. You've heard the expression that talk is cheap. But Often it's clear. They've said they'd do something, and sometimes it's not. And so getting clear about what a direct commitment is can be as simple as asking, have we made some kind of agreement? Or even better, at the end of a meeting, so who said they'll do what by when? Just getting that clarity goes a really long way toward making sure that your meetings become effective and that everyone understands who has committed to whom about what. This works for individuals making commitments one-to-one. It works for teams. And it matters a lot. It really does that you track these things, because a commitment made to you by someone else is almost like this tiny little contract. And it's going to take up psychological space. They're going to live in your head rent-free for a bit until that contract gets fulfilled. And in some ways, actually, I've found that it takes up more space if I don't track it in some kind of simple way than the commitments that I've made to other people. In this methodology I was talking about, getting things done, we identify a special type of list called the waiting for list. And it's just that. It's a list of commitments other people have made to you that you're waiting for them to fulfill. It can be everything from an Amazon order that needs to be delivered to someone giving you feedback on a report, or really anything else in your world. But keeping track of these commitments, some people go, oh, that's creepy. That's like, following up on them, micromanaging them. Not at all. It's just keeping track of them so that you can acknowledge when they're done, and so that you can follow up nicely and appropriately and encourage them to keep their commitments to you in a responsible manner. It goes a really long way toward improving trust and clarity for teams, for families, for whole companies. When you start to get clear about and start to track when other people are making commitments to you. So the final type of commitment is commitments that others make, but not necessarily directly to you. They're not saying, I will do this to you, but they're talking about something that they're going to do that matters to you, something you care about. So that's often a question to ask is, do I care that this thing happens or not? Does it matter to me? And if it does, just like with those commitments that are direct to you, we recommend that you track them in some way, that you put them onto a list of things that you're waiting for to see if they happen, or if they are one of your direct reports or someone that, important in your life. We also have another list we call projects delegated, those projects that are actively important to you, but you're not necessarily the one doing the work. At the end of the day, you need to get this stuff externalized in some way. You need to get it captured, you need to get it down, and you need to be able to review it periodically so that you make sure that those commitments that are floating out there, that you make, that others make, that are direct or that are kind of indirect and implied, don't just kind of float off into this sort of void or morass of lack of clarity and of lack of motion. Commitments tracked tend to be commitments that get fulfilled, and they tend to get fulfilled more quickly when they are in fact tracked. Nobody likes someone that says they'll do something and doesn't. It just doesn't feel good for them. It doesn't feel good for you. And there's something you can do about it. Tracking your commitments, tracking other people's commitments. At the end of the day, I have this kind of bell in my gut that goes off, if you like, for stuff that's actionable, stuff that has something that needs doing about it. When I sense commitments are happening, I start to feel a little uneasy if that slides, if no one is keeping track of the importance of that. And so the real secret to freedom, I've found, is actually keeping track of the stuff that matters. We live in a world that's highly sort of parameterized. There's lots of conditions on us. Life is constrained in a lot of different ways about, when your working hours are and what your different responsibilities are. There's also a lot of choice within all of that. One of the biggest choices you have is whether or not you're going to commit to doing something or not. So to me, this is a big key. This is a kind of not only actionability filter, but in a way, an accountability mechanism as well. I don't make commitments lightly, but the ones I do, I make sure to see through. If this has been useful, if this has rung your bell in any way, there is in fact a little bell icon on the YouTube video. You can subscribe and you can get notified and videos like this can magically appear in your world. Finally, having heard all of this, you can go confidently into the world. And when someone says to you, "Hey, have you heard that great joke about Pavlov?" You can say, "No, it doesn't ring a bell." Go make conscious commitments, thrive, and be well. See you soon.